Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My neighbor introduced Karen to our group after she moved into the unit across from his. She seemed normal at first, just your typical 20-something looking to make friends in a new place. I should have trusted my gut when she made that backhanded comment about my supposedly interesting fashion choices during our first meeting, but I figured I was being too judgmental. So when my friend and I decided to host a game night at my place, I invited her along. Biggest mistake ever. The night started with sardines, that hide-and-seek game where everyone crams into one hiding spot. We'd all been drinking, so when the lights went out, things got chaotic pretty quickly. I was crawling around trying to find where everyone was hiding when I felt someone push my head straight into the corner of a bookshelf. Hard! I yelped in pain and asked what the hell had just happened. Karen immediately started apologizing, claiming she had totally fallen and it was an accident. Everyone came out of hiding to make sure I was okay. I had a decent bump forming on my forehead, but nothing serious. That's when Karen dropped the bomb. She admitted she hadn't fallen at all. She said she found the hiding spot first, so she pushed me to protect her spot. She was laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. Everyone else just stared at her in shock. One of my friends asked if she had intentionally hurt me, and Karen brushed it off, saying it was just a game and that I was fine. I was too stunned to say anything, so we moved on to the next game. King's Cup seemed safer since we'd all be sitting around a table. Wrong again. During the Never Have I Ever round, Karen decided to get personal. She said she'd never been divorced before 25, while looking directly at me with this smug smile. The whole table went silent. Everyone there knew about my divorce and had been incredibly supportive during that difficult time. I asked if that was really what she was going with, and she told me not to take it so personally. She claimed she was just being honest and that some of us make better choices than others. One of my friends told her that was pretty messed up, but Karen just shrugged it off. The rest of the night continued like this. Every chance she got, Karen would make little digs at me or try to embarrass me in front of everyone. By the time people started leaving, I was convinced she had it out for me for some reason. It didn't take long to figure out why. Mark, one of our mutual friends, had been there that night. He's this really sweet guy, tall, funny, and definitely attractive. We become close friends over the past few months, and I could tell Karen didn't like that one bit. She clearly developed a thing for him and saw me as competition. For the next 6 months, every time Mark was around, Karen would ramp up her behavior. She'd accidentally spill drinks on me, interrupt me mid-story, or make snide comments about my appearance. It was exhausting, but I didn't want to cause drama in the friend group. Then came the tattoo situation. I've been planning to get a dragon tattoo for over a year. It wasn't just some random design I picked off the wall. My mom had always loved dragons, and before she passed, we used to talk about getting matching tattoos someday. I'd worked with my tattoo artist for months, incorporating her favorite flowers into the design and figuring out the perfect placement and style. About a month before my appointment, Karen overheard me talking to another friend about it. She asked what kind of tattoo I was getting, acting all interested. I told her it was a dragon design that I've been planning for a while. I watched her face light up with this weird excitement, and I swear I could see the wheels turning in her head. She asked more questions about where I was getting it and what it would look like. That's when I had my own light bulb moment. I knew exactly what she was thinking, and I decided to have a little fun with it. I told her I was obsessed with this movie called Spirited Away and asked if she'd seen it. She said she'd never heard of it, so I launched into this whole story about how my dad showed it to me when I was little and how I grew up loving it. I explained that there was this character named Haku who turns into this beautiful dragon, and I thought it would be amazing if he was wrapped around my arm. I went on and on about how meaningful the movie was to me and how perfect this tattoo would be. Karen was eating it up, asking more questions about the design and where I was getting it done. She said it sounded incredible and that I'd have to show her the movie sometime. I encouraged her to check it out before I got the tattoo. Now, I figured someone who'd never heard of one of the most famous animated movies ever probably wouldn't bother watching it, let alone get a tattoo based on it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, Karen showed up to our usual hangout spot with her arm wrapped in plastic. She excitedly announced that she had something to show us and unwrapped this massive dragon tattoo that covered her entire forearm. And it wasn't just any dragon. It was Haku from Spirited Away, wrapped around her arm exactly like I described. She asked if I loved it, and explained that she watched the movie after I told her about it and just had to get the tattoo done. She wanted to know if it looked just like what I had wanted. I stared at her arm in complete shock. The tattoo was actually really well done, but I couldn't believe she'd actually gone through with it. I managed to say that it was exactly what I described. Karen beamed and said she knew right. She hoped I didn't mind that she got it first, but she just couldn't wait. She looked so pleased with herself, probably expecting me to be devastated that she'd stolen my tattoo idea. Instead, I just smiled and told her it looked great on her. That night, I went home and couldn't decide if I should feel guilty for lying or impressed by how ridiculous she was. I mean, who gets a permanent tattoo on their body just to spite someone, especially a tattoo from a movie they'd never even seen before? I got my real dragon tattoo a month later, the one I'd actually planned with my mom's favorite flowers woven throughout the design. It was beautiful and meaningful, and I loved every inch of it. For the next 2 years, every time I saw Karen's Haku tattoo, I'd swing between feeling bad about my lie and laughing at how absurd the situation was. She'd gotten a massive, expensive, permanent tattoo on her body based on a complete fabrication. All because she wanted to hurt me. Recently, I finally told one of my friends about what I'd done. I was feeling guilty and needed to get it off my chest. My friend asked if I had really made up that whole Spirited Away thing, and I admitted that I had. I said I felt terrible about it, but my friend told me not to feel bad. She said I should hear what happened at Karen's tattoo appointment. My friend had gone with Karen that day, and Karen had said word for word that I was going to be so upset because it was like the exact tattoo I wanted. So Karen hadn't gotten the tattoo because she loved the movie or connected with the character. She got it specifically to hurt me, thinking she was ruining something important to me. The fact that she ended up with a permanent reminder of her own pettiness in my little trick was perfect. I'm a single mom and my kids are 6 and 10. We've built a good life together in our little house. The divorce was messy, but we came out stronger. One of the things that helped us heal was getting involved with our neighbors. They became like family to us. For the past 4 years, I've been hosting this end of summer party in my backyard. It started small, just me and the neighbors on either side of us. But word spread, and now it's this amazing tradition where about 15 families come together. Kids run around, adults chat and laugh, and everyone brings something to share. It's honestly the highlight of my year. The setup has always been the same. We party until around 9, then the kids get sleepy. Since my house is right there, I take my kids inside, get them ready for bed, and tuck them in. They can hear everything from their rooms. My bedroom balcony overlooks the whole backyard. Plus, they have a phone by their bed if they need me. Once they're settled, I go back outside for another hour or two with the adults. It works perfectly. 6 months ago, I started dating this guy. He's 46, divorced, and has 2 kids aged 5 and 7. Things were going well, or so I thought. He seemed nice, responsible, and his kids were sweet. When the party was coming up, I invited him and his kids to join us. I was excited to introduce him to my neighbors and include his family in our tradition, but he said no right away. I told him I'd love for him and the kids to come to the party and that everyone was excited to meet them. He immediately said he didn't think it would work out. When I asked why, he started asking what would happen when the kids got tired. I explained our usual routine about how I put my kids to bed upstairs and then come back down to continue the party. He said he wasn't comfortable with his kids sleeping at my place since they'd never stayed here before. I told him I understood completely and that it was totally fine. Then he said he also didn't like the idea of putting his kids to bed at my place while I was still outside partying. I said, okay, no problem. Maybe next year when they were more comfortable. But then he added that he also didn't want to leave early with his kids while I stayed and partied. I was getting confused at this point. It seemed like every option bothered him. I told him that those were really the only ways it could work, but that it was honestly fine if this party wasn't a good fit for his family right now. That's when his whole attitude changed. He accused me of making them unwelcome, saying the way I'd set up the party made it impossible for families like his to participate. I explained that I've been doing this party the same way for 4 years and it worked for everyone who came. He insisted that it didn't work for him and that I should change it. When I asked him to change it how, he said I should leave the party when it was bedtime for all the kids. He wanted us all to go inside together, put the kids to bed, and then hang out inside instead. I explained that this would end the party for everyone since the other adults wanted to stay outside and enjoy the evening. He told me I should choose between my boyfriend and his kids, or my party. I said it wasn't about choosing, but about a tradition that worked for everyone who participated. He kept insisting that everyone meant everyone except them. I tried to explain that the party format wasn't personal, it was just how we'd always done it. But he said if I cared about including them, I'd make it work. I was starting to get frustrated. This felt like emotional blackmail. I told him I did care about including them, but I wasn't going to completely change a 4-year tradition for one person. He got even more upset, saying he wasn't just one person, he was my boyfriend, and should matter more than my neighbors. I tried to explain that this wasn't about who mattered more, it was about being reasonable. The conversation ended badly, and I thought that was that. The night of the party arrived and it was amazing as always. Kids were running through sprinklers, adults were grilling and chatting, everyone was having a blast. Around 8:30 I started getting my kids ready for bed. My phone was inside charging and honestly, I was so busy hosting that I forgot about it. The party went until almost midnight and I finally checked my phone when I went to bed. 7 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from him. The messages started reasonable, hoping the party was going well and saying he missed us, but they got progressively angrier, saying he couldn't believe I wasn't answering and that he guessed he knew where he stood. The final messages said this was really hurtful, that I clearly didn't care about him at all, and that he was reconsidering the whole relationship. I was exhausted, so I decided to deal with it the next morning. Big mistake. He showed up at my house at 8 a.m. clearly having worked himself into a rage overnight. He said we needed to talk, completely ignoring my greeting. When I asked him not to get sarcastic, he told me not to get sarcastic with him and announced that he'd called me 7 times the night before. I explained that I was hosting a party and my phone was inside. He said I should have made time to call him back. I pointed out that I had 30 people in my backyard, but he insisted that as my boyfriend, he should be a priority. I told him he was a priority, but I was in the middle of hosting an event. He accused me of choosing an event over him and his kids. I said I didn't choose anything over anyone. He chose not to come. He fired back that it was because I refused to accommodate them. This was going in circles, and my kids were starting to wake up upstairs. I suggested we take some time to cool off, but he said he wanted this resolved immediately. I told him there was nothing to resolve. I hosted a party the way I always hosted it, and he decided not to come, which was fine. He insisted it wasn't fine and that I should have changed the party for them. I asked why I would change a tradition that worked for 15 families to accommodate one family that had other options. He said it was because he was my boyfriend. I told him that being my boyfriend didn't mean I reorganized my entire life around his preferences. Then he said the words that made everything clear: if I loved him, I would. That stopped me cold. I realized this wasn't really about the party at all. I told him that if he loved me, he wouldn't ask me to. He said that wasn't the same thing, but I insisted it was exactly the same thing. My 10-year-old appeared at the top of the stairs in pajamas, asking why everyone was yelling. I told my child to go get some cereal and that I'd be right there, but my boyfriend actually complained that I was putting my kids before our conversation. I confirmed that yes, I was putting my kids first because they lived here. He said this was exactly what he was talking about, that I always put everything before him. I pointed out that we'd been dating for 6 months while I'd been a mother for 10 years. He demanded to know when he would become my priority. I explained that he was a priority but not the only priority and definitely not more important than my children. He said that wasn't how relationships were supposed to work. I realized I was looking at a man who wanted me to choose him over my kids, my friends, my traditions, and basically my entire life. I told him I thought we wanted different things. He asked what I meant, so I explained that he seemed to want a girlfriend who would drop everything for him, while I needed a partner who understood that I had a full life. He said he just wanted to feel important to me. I told him he was important, but so were other people and things in my life. He couldn't accept that answer. The conversation kept going in circles until my 6-year-old came downstairs asking for breakfast. My boyfriend actually rolled his eyes and muttered something about how the kids always came first. That was my breaking point. I told him he was right, my kids would always come first, and if he couldn't handle that, then we weren't compatible. He said I was being unreasonable and that most women would be willing to compromise for their relationship. I walked to the door and opened it. I told him I wasn't most women, I was a mother first and foremost, and I wasn't going to apologize for that. He stood there for a moment like he couldn't believe I was ending things. Then he said I'd regret this and that I'd never find someone willing to deal with my baggage. I smiled and told him my kids weren't baggage. They were the best part of my life, and the right person would see that. He left, slamming the door behind him. My 10-year-old asked if I was okay. I hugged both my kids and told them I was perfect. And I meant it. 2 weeks later, he texted asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. A month after that, I heard from a neighbor that he was dating someone else and telling people I was crazy and controlling. I just laughed. This year's end of summer party is in 2 weeks, and it's going to be the best one yet. My sister and I used to be close growing up. She's 5 years older than me and always acted like a second mom. When we became adults, she got married first and started trying for kids right away. Meanwhile, I was focusing on my career in accounting and didn't even think about having children until my late 20s. The problems started 3 years ago when my sister found out she couldn't have biological children. The doctors told her it was something genetic that made pregnancy impossible. She was devastated, and I felt terrible for her. But instead of looking into adoption or other options, she became obsessed with my pregnancy when I announced I was expecting. At first, it seemed sweet. She bought tons of baby stuff and wanted to be involved in every appointment. But then the comments started getting weird. She would tell me how lucky I was that pregnancy came naturally to me, and how some people weren't that blessed. When I suggested there were other ways to become a mom, she would say it was easy for me to talk since I could just pop out kids whenever I wanted. After my son was born, things got worse. She would show up unannounced and stay for hours. She insisted on feeding him, changing him, and even tried to tell me I was doing things wrong. When he started walking and talking, she would correct me in front of him and tell him to come to her instead of listening to me. The breaking point came 6 months ago during a family barbecue. My son, who's now 3, was playing in the yard when she pulled me aside. She told me she'd been thinking a lot lately about how unfair life was. She said I had this perfect little boy and could easily have more children, but she would never experience being a mother. I tried to bring up adoption again or suggested she look into being a foster parent. She said that wasn't the same and that she wanted to raise a child from the beginning to be their real mother. The conversation made me uncomfortable, but I didn't realize how far her thinking had gone until 2 weeks later. She called me crying and said she couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. She told me she had so much love to give and reminded me that I was young enough to have more kids. When I asked what she was getting at, she suggested that maybe I could let her raise my son. She said I could visit whenever I wanted, but she could be his primary parent. She kept saying I could have another baby, but she couldn't. I told her absolutely not, and that she needed professional help. She started screaming about how selfish I was and how I didn't understand real pain. I hung up and didn't speak to her for months. Last week, my son needed minor surgery to remove his tonsils. Nothing serious, but he had to stay overnight for observation. I was exhausted from sleeping in the hospital chair and decided to grab coffee from the cafeteria while he was napping. When I came back 20 minutes later, my son's bed was empty. I panicked and ran to the nurse's station. I asked where my son was, explaining he had been in room 314. The nurse checked her records and told me that a woman who had signed in as his aunt said she was taking him to the bathroom. My heart stopped. I knew my sister wasn't supposed to know about the surgery. I'd specifically not told anyone in my family because I didn't want the drama. When I asked what this woman looked like, the nurse described my sister perfectly. I explained the situation and begged them to help me find her. The security team locked down the hospital and started searching. 20 minutes later, they found her in the parking garage trying to put my groggy son into her car. He was still in his hospital gown and barely awake from the medication. My son was asking for me and saying he wanted to go home. My sister was telling him they were going home and that she was taking him to a better place. A security guard ordered her to stop and put the child down. She said he was her nephew and that there had been a misunderstanding. When I got to the parking garage, I was shaking with rage and relief. My son reached for me and told me that his aunt had said that they were going to live at her house forever. I held him tight and told him he was safe. My sister looked at me with wild eyes and screamed that I didn't deserve him. She yelled that she would be a better mother and that I took everything for granted. I told her she had just tried to kidnap my child from a hospital and called her insane. She shouted back that she was saving him from a mother who didn't appreciate what she had. The police arrived within minutes. When they put handcuffs on her, she was still screaming about how unfair it all was and how I could just make another child. My son was crying and clinging to me. The hospital staff were incredible. They checked my son thoroughly to make sure he was okay and let us stay an extra night for observation. The nurses kept apologizing even though it wasn't their fault. It turns out my sister had been watching the hospital for days, waiting for an opportunity. She'd seen me post about the surgery on social media before I deleted it. She'd forged visitor paperwork and somehow convinced the staff she was authorized to take him. The detective who interviewed me said this wasn't her first offense. She'd been reported for strange behavior around children at playgrounds and had been banned from her local library story time for trying to take other people's kids home with her. She was charged with attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, and trespassing. The judge denied her bail because she was considered a flight risk. Her husband filed for divorce the next week, saying he'd had no idea how unstable she'd become. My son doesn't fully understand what happened, but he keeps asking why his aunt tried to take him away. I've started him in play therapy to help him process the experience. I've got a restraining order and have moved to a new apartment across town. I've also hired a lawyer to make sure she can never come near my son again. The thought that she almost succeeded in taking him still gives me nightmares. Some family members think I'm being too harsh and that she just needs help. But you don't get to traumatize my child and call it love. She made her choice when she decided her wants were more important than my son's safety and well-being. The trial is next month. I'm hoping she gets the maximum sentence and some serious psychological help. But mostly, I'm just grateful my son is safe and that the hospital staff acted quickly when they realized something was wrong. I've been working part-time at this local print shop for about 8 months now while I finish my business degree. Most days are pretty straightforward. People come in needing copies for work presentations, students printing assignments last minute, small business owners making flyers. The worst I usually deal with is someone upset about paper jams or wanting a discount because their copies came out slightly crooked. I started working there because my cousin knew the owner and put in a good word for me. I needed something flexible since I'm taking a full course load and couldn't commit to a regular 9 to 5. The print shop seemed perfect, mostly quiet, steady work, and my manager is pretty understanding about adjusting my hours during finals week. The shop itself is nothing fancy, just your typical small business setup with a few commercial printers, a laminator, binding equipment, and the usual office supplies. We get a mix of regular customers and walk-ins, and honestly, most people are pretty reasonable about what we can and can't do. But last Tuesday, this woman walked in and completely changed my perspective on customer service horror stories. She came through the door around 2 in the afternoon carrying this absolutely massive stack of papers. I'm talking thick, had to be at least 200 pages, maybe more. She walked straight to the counter and dropped it down with a loud thud. She told me that she needed the whole thing stapled. I looked at this mountain of paper and immediately knew we had a problem. Our regular desktop stapler maxes out at maybe 20 pages on a good day. We do have a heavy-duty stapler for bigger jobs, but even that tops out around 50 pages. I explained that this was a pretty thick document and our staplers wouldn't be able to handle something this size. I offered to help her with some alternatives like binder clips to hold it together, or if she wanted something more permanent, we could spiral bind it for her. She told me that was ridiculous and that this was a print shop, so I should just staple it. I tried to explain again that I understood her frustration, but this stack was just too thick for our equipment. I showed her how thick it was compared to what our stapler could handle by holding up our heavy-duty stapler next to her stack. The papers were easily 4 times thicker than what the stapler was designed for. She said she didn't care about my excuses and told me to make it work anyway. I had to explain that if I tried to force this through our stapler, it would break the machine. These staplers have limits and this was way beyond them. That's when things took a weird turn. She said fine, but when the stapler broke, I would give her a heavy-duty stapler to take home so she could finish the job herself. She claimed it would be my fault for having inadequate equipment. I had to pause for a second because of what I'd just heard. I told her that wasn't how this worked. We weren't going to deliberately break our equipment, and we definitely couldn't give away staplers. I explained that if she wanted this document bound together, she would need to find somewhere with industrial binding equipment, or we could do the spiral binding I had mentioned earlier. That's when she completely lost it. She started yelling that this was absolutely unacceptable and asking what kind of customer service this was. She got louder and more animated, waving her hands around and pointing at me while saying that we people clearly didn't know how to run a business. She went on about how small businesses like ours didn't deserve to succeed if we couldn't handle simple requests. She demanded to speak to my manager right away. I told her my manager wasn't in right now, but I could have him call her back, or she could come back later when he was there. She said this was ridiculous and threatened to go online and leave reviews everywhere. She promised to make sure everyone knew how useless this place was, and that she would tell all her friends never to come here. By this point, a line had formed behind her with about 5 other customers waiting. I could see people checking their phones and looking annoyed. One guy kept looking at his watch. The man directly behind her finally had enough. He told her that they had given her options and she should either take one of them or leave because she was holding up everyone else. She whipped around and told him to excuse her and mind his own business because this didn't concern him. The customer shot back that it actually did concern him because he had somewhere to be, and she was having a meltdown over a stapler. I could see her face getting red. She was clearly embarrassed that other people were watching her tantrum, but she was too committed to back down now. She called all of us impossible and grabbed her stack of papers, walking toward the door. When she left, she yelled that she was calling corporate and would make sure I got fired. She announced loudly that this was the worst service she had ever received. Then she was gone, leaving the whole shop in this weird silence. The customer who had spoken up just shook his head and stepped forward. He said sorry I had to deal with that and said some people just can't accept reality. I thanked him and asked what I could help him with. The rest of the afternoon went smoothly, but I kept thinking about the whole interaction. About an hour later, my manager came back from his lunch meeting. My manager asked how everything had been, so I explained the whole stapler saga, including her threat to call corporate and get me fired. He asked if she thought we were like a chain store or something, and I said I guessed so, since she seemed pretty convinced she could get me in trouble with some corporate office. My manager just started laughing. He said that was perfect because he actually did get a voicemail while he was out from some woman ranting about staplers and demanding we deliver a new heavy-duty stapler to her house as compensation for our inadequate equipment. He told me he had deleted it. I said that was probably her, and my manager agreed it definitely was. He told me not to worry about it and that I had handled it exactly right. He said we weren't going to break our equipment just to appease someone who can't understand basic limitations. The whole thing still makes me shake my head. I mean, I get that people can get frustrated when they can't get exactly what they want, but demanding that we break our own equipment and then give her a free stapler as compensation, that's a whole different level of entitled thinking. She actually thought we were some big chain with a corporate office she could complain to. We're literally a family-owned shop with 3 employees total. My manager is basically the corporate office, and he thought the whole thing was hilarious. I haven't seen her since, but something tells me she's not going to be back anytime soon, which is probably for good, since we still don't have a stapler that can handle 200-page documents. I've been working in manufacturing for about 15 years now, and I've seen my fair share of lazy co-workers. But nothing prepared me for the nightmare that was working alongside this one guy at my old job. Let me paint you a picture of what my life was like back then. I started working at this mid-sized electronics company right after college. It was one of those places where they made circuit boards and computer components. I was assigned to the quality control department, which meant I spent my days testing products and making sure they met company standards before shipping. The job required 2 people to be on the floor at all times during business hours. Makes sense, right? When there was a problem with a batch or a machine malfunctioned, you needed someone there to catch it immediately. The company was pretty strict about this policy because one bad shipment could cost them thousands of dollars and damage their reputation with clients. That's where my coworker comes in. This guy had been at the company for about 3 years when I started, so he was supposed to show me the ropes. At first, everything seemed normal. He knew the procedures, explained the equipment, and seemed professional enough. But after my first month, his true colors started showing. It began with small things. He'd take longer bathroom breaks when we were busy. He'd spend extra time chatting with people from other departments while I handled the workload. But the thing that really got under my skin was his lunch routine. Our lunch break was supposed to be from 12 to 1. Pretty standard stuff, but this guy had this habit of disappearing at 11:30, especially on days when we had big orders to process. He'd just vanish, leaving me alone on the floor during our busiest time. The first few times it happened, I figured maybe he had a doctor's appointment or some family emergency. So I covered for him and worked through my own lunch break to keep up with the schedule. I'm not the type to throw someone under the bus, especially when I was still new, but it kept happening. Week after week, he'd slip out early whenever we had a heavy workload. I started timing it, and sure enough, every Tuesday and Thursday, when we had our biggest shipments to process, he'd be gone by 11:30 and wouldn't come back until after 1. I tried talking to him about it a few times. I mentioned that I had noticed he was leaving early for lunch lately and that it was pretty tough handling everything alone during the rush. He apologized and said he had some stuff to take care of, promising it wouldn't happen again. But it did happen again, and again, and again. He acted like it was no big deal. He'd stroll back from his extended lunch break, usually carrying food from some restaurant across town that definitely took more than 30 minutes to reach, and act surprised that I looked stressed. He would ask if everything was okay, acting shocked that it had gotten busy while he was gone. I'd tell him about the 3 rush orders that came in and how I had to skip lunch to get them processed on time. His response was always something about how I should have grabbed something quick from the vending machine next time. The audacity? He was telling me to eat vending machine food while he went out for proper meals during my lunch hour. This went on for months. I started bringing protein bars and eating them while working, just so I wouldn't pass out from hunger. My wife kept asking why I looked so tired all the time, but I didn't want to complain about a coworker to management. I figured I'd give him more chances to do the right thing. But then came the day that changed everything. I was punching out after a brutal shift where he'd disappeared for almost 2 hours. When I walked through the break room, I noticed something on top of the refrigerator. There, sitting next to the magnetic calendars and company announcements, was his employee badge. Our badges were these magnetic strip cards that we had to swipe to clock in and out. The company used some system called Chronos to track our hours. The badges were pretty sensitive and everyone knew you weren't supposed to leave them near magnets because it could mess up the data. I stared at that badge for a solid minute, my brain working overtime. Here was this guy who had been making my life miserable for months, and he was careless enough to leave his badge right next to a bunch of magnets. An idea started forming in my head. I looked around the break room. Nobody was there. I picked up his badge and grabbed one of the magnetic calendars off the fridge. Then I rubbed that magnet all over his badge, making sure to hit every part of the magnetic strip. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds. I put everything back where I found it, went home feeling a little guilty, but also kind of excited to see what would happen. The next morning I got to work early and watched from my desk when he tried to swipe in. He swiped his badge once. Nothing. He tried again, turning it around. Still nothing. He started getting frustrated, swiping it harder and faster. He cursed and wondered what was wrong with his badge. He tried cleaning it on his shirt, holding it different ways, even borrowing someone else's badge to make sure the reader was working. Finally, he had to walk over to our supervisor's desk. He told our supervisor that his badge wasn't working and he couldn't clock in. The supervisor asked if he had left it near any magnets, since that could wipe the data. He insisted he was always careful with it and never did anything like that. The supervisor had to manually log his time and told him he'd need to go to HR to get a replacement badge. I watched him walk off to the HR office and I smiled a little. He was gone for almost 40 minutes dealing with the whole situation. Later that day, he came back with a shiny new badge, complaining to anyone who would listen about how the old one just stopped working for no reason. He was extra careful with it, keeping it in his wallet instead of clipping it to his shirt like before. But here's the beautiful part. By the end of the week, his new badge was sitting right back on top of that refrigerator. Some people never learn, so I did it again. Same routine, same magnet, same result. The next Monday, he was back at HR getting another replacement badge, looking even more confused and frustrated than before. The HR representative told him this was the second time this month and asked if he was sure he wasn't exposing his badge to magnets. He swore he wasn't doing anything different and complained that these badges must be defective. The third time it happened, things got interesting. He had to go to HR during his lunch break, which meant he actually had to eat in the break room like a normal person. I watched him sitting there with a sad sandwich from the vending machine while I enjoyed my full-hour lunch break for the first time in months. By now, other people in the office were starting to notice. Word got around that this guy kept destroying his badges somehow, and people started joking about it. Someone even nicknamed him Badge Killer. After the third replacement, I decided to lay low for a while. I'd made my point, and honestly, I was worried that if it happened again, HR might start investigating more seriously. But watching his behavior change was amazing. He became paranoid about his badge, constantly checking his pockets and never leaving it anywhere. He stopped taking those long lunches because he was afraid of somehow damaging his badge while he was out. He even started coming back exactly at 1 o'clock, sometimes rushing to make sure he wasn't late. The funny thing is, his productivity actually improved. When he wasn't disappearing for extended breaks, he was actually a decent worker. Our department started running smoother, and I finally got to take proper lunch breaks again. A few months later, he transferred to a different department. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.